Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card that features the Kitten in Love digital stamp from Gerda Steiner Designs. To start out with, I printed the digital stamp on my LaserJet printer, and I'll be coloring it with Spectrum Noir colored pencils and some Gamsol for blending. I'll be using the 3 grays and a black. You can see that I already colored one of the kittens. I'm only going to show you coloring of one kitten. The coloring does take quite a bit of time, especially with the colored pencils, as there's a lot more layering of color, but I do want to be able to share with you some tips about how I do it. So I'm going to start with the very lightest color and just lightly color the entire cat. I try to be somewhat careful with my pencil strokes, as you can see them a little bit, and so I try to make sure that I'm only going in one direction, and I don't want to press so hard that I actually make dents in the paper. Once I finish laying in each layer, I take some of the Gamsol on a blending stump and blend in the colored pencil. I find with colored pencils I get the best results if I go from lightest to darkest, and if I use a gentle hand and lots of layering over time. It does take, in a way, a little bit more patience than Copics because it's slightly longer, but at the same time you don't have to worry as much because the ink, like an ink and Copic markers, kind of leaks into the paper a little bit, particularly if you have a thinner paper. And so I think that in some ways colored pencils are a little bit more beginner friendly. You can see there that I'm taking my blending stump and sanding it out. When you get a color that you don't want on your blending stump, you can just take it to some sandpaper and you can just sand off that little bit that you don't want anymore. I also trim it a little bit to get a point. You can even take the blending stump and put it in a traditional pencil sharpener. I'm continuing to just layer on color. I am putting the darker colors only in the areas where there should be shadows. These areas would be where 2 parts of the cat meet, or one of the cats meets the other cat, and also in the areas that I want to look rounded. So if I add darker colors on each side of his face and let the middle of the face be lighter, it will appear as if that part of the face is coming towards you, and it will give it a rounded feel of the face. And you can use that on any part of an animal to give it, or any object really, to just give it that rounded dimension. You could do that on legs as well, just to make them look a little bit more in dimension. I generally find that if you do those simple kind of blending areas and those simple shadowing, you can get a pretty great effect without having to be an expert in light sources. I decided to use the colored pencils to create my background. Sometimes I use distressing to create the background, and that can be pretty quick, but I just wanted to experiment with how much time it might take to make a background with colored pencils, and just to see what it would look like. So I took the lightest of the pink colored pencils. There's this like pink purple range in the Essentials collection. I'm using the Essentials collection from Spectrum Noir. And I laid out the lightest color all over the background. And then I'm going to come in with some shadows all around the cats. And I'm going to leave it darkest in between the areas where, like in between the 2 cats, or in between a cat and its tail, and then just make it slightly darker on the edges of the cats, like where the cat meets the ground kind of thing. And by just layering on this color over time, it brings the highlight to the cats because they are where it is darkest, and it draws your attention into them and adds to the depth of the picture. So once I finish creating my colored panel, I want to move on to the background. I'm going to create my own pattern paper today. When you look at the color wheel, you can come up with a triad of purple, pink, and red in terms of 3 colors that are near each other on the color wheel and complementary. I use the website Color Scheme Designer to look up some color schemes sometimes. Like I knew I was going to be using purple and pink today, but when I decided that I wanted to pull in a 3rd color, I referenced that. And I find that generally that's helpful. And you know, you don't have to stick to it, and it's not to say that no other color combinations work, but it's just one resource that I find helpful. I'm using the stencil from Die Cuts with a View. I taped it down with some painter's tape, or any low-tack tape would do, and then I'm layering in Distress ink. I'm just taking the mini ink blender tool and pouncing the Distress ink on. When I add Distress ink, I usually do a bit of a pounce and twist motion, and I find that generally gets enough blending through stencils. And I also like to do the twisting motion as opposed to more of a rubbing motion, because sometimes the rubbing motion can cause the stencil to lift up and not get as quite of a crisp stenciling. I'm using Fired Brick, Seedless Preserves, and then Dusty Concord in that order to create some red and purple in the background to complement the pink around the cats. I decided to mat that on some purple paper to tie in that purple color more, and then I'm adding a sentiment on a piece of red cardstock that I cut a little banner fishtail end into there, and I do that just by cutting into the center and then creating a triangle by cutting from the two sides. After I layered it on, I just trimmed off the edge. The stenciled panel is with the largest of the small stitched rectangles from Lawn Fawn, and then my card is finished. I also used the stitched circles from My Favorite Things for the cat panel. That's it for my card today. If you enjoyed, can you please give this video a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafty videos, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave you a link to where you can find these adorable cats in the Gerda Steiner store, as well as to the other supplies I used in case you're interested. Thanks for watching. Bye.